My wife's parents called a family meeting. You owe us for her college, her wedding, and every dinner we paid for. My wife whispered, they just want a refund on raising me. I stood up, grabbed my wallet, and said, fine, let me pay you to disappear from our lives forever. They went silent. Then my father-in-law started crying. My name is Nolan. I'm 42, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, a town that smells like pine and fresh rain half the year, and where you can't walk 5 minutes downtown without someone offering you a cup of locally roasted coffee or trying to sell you handmade candles. I like it here. The air is cleaner than anywhere else I've lived. People wave when they drive past. It's small town enough to feel familiar, but big enough that you can still disappear when you need to. I run a landscaping business, just me, my buddy Lionel, and 2 guys we've known since we were barely out of high school. We don't make a fortune, but it's honest work. I come home tired, sure, but there's something deeply satisfying about watching a wild mess of weeds turn into something neat, something people are proud to show off. It's slow, steady, and quiet, exactly the opposite of what my in-laws think a career should look like. My wife, Harper, is a graphic designer. Freelance, mostly. She's got this quiet way about her, like someone who's been taught all her life not to speak too loudly in her own home. When we met, she was still putting herself through the final year of college after some financial aid got screwed up. I helped when I could, and her parents picked up the rest. At the time, I thought it was generous. I thought they were just parents who wanted to help. Harper's parents are Suzanne and Gordon. They live on the edge of Biltmore Forest in one of those colonial revival houses with tall white columns, manicured hedges, and a driveway longer than most people's streets. Gordon used to be a high-powered attorney in Charlotte. Suzanne never worked, but you'd think being the queen of Buncombe County society was a full-time job with the way she carried herself. From day one, they saw me as a fixer-upper. Someone with potential, maybe, but rough around the edges. I dressed wrong, I spoke too plainly, and I didn't come from their kind of people. But Harper loved me. She always said I was the only place in the world she felt like she could breathe. We got married in the spring, one of those mountain weddings with wildflowers everywhere and a slight chill in the air that made everyone keep their arms folded during the ceremony. Suzanne insisted on paying for it. She said it was a gift that families should support each other. Gordon nodded along, quiet as usual, a presence more than a person. Over the years, they continued to help. Dinners at their place every few Sundays. Expensive bottles of wine they insisted on opening. Vacations where they covered the hotel and then made it sound like we owed them our souls in return. It was always coated in sugar, but I started to realize over time it wasn't generosity. It was a ledger, and our names were on it. Then came last Sunday. Harper got a text from her mother midweek, asking us to come by for dinner. Nothing unusual. I remember it was drizzling that day, that kind of cold mist that makes everything feel slower. We showed up around 6. The house looked the same as always, immaculate, polished, sterile. Felix, Harper's younger brother, was already there. He's 30, still lives at home, reads books on metaphysics, and occasionally posts his thoughts online like he's the next Plato. I've got nothing against the guy, but he's lived in a bubble so long he doesn't even know he's inside one. We sat down to dinner, roast beef, potatoes, something green and oversteamed. Harper was making small talk with Suzanne about her latest charity auction. Gordon was unusually quiet. Then, about halfway through the meal, he cleared his throat in that lawyer way, like he was preparing to present evidence. I think it's time we had a serious discussion, he said. Harper's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I looked at her, and she shrugged slightly. No clue. Suzanne took over. She always does. We've been reviewing some things, she said, and we feel it's time to rebalance the contributions in this family. There was a pause, one of those long, quiet moments where you think maybe you misunderstood something. What does that mean? I asked. Gordon reached down and pulled out a manila envelope from beside his chair. He slid it across the table to me. There is a breakdown of the support we've provided over the years, he said. College tuition, wedding costs, trips, dinners. We've been generous, but we feel it's appropriate now to revisit the financial equity of those decisions. I didn't touch the envelope. I just looked at Harper. Her face had gone pale. You're asking us to pay you back? She said softly. Not everything, Suzanne said quickly. Just a portion. A gesture. It's about fairness. Harper whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. They just want a refund on raising me. That hit harder than anything. It wasn't just the money. It was what it meant. That every moment they spent supporting her, loving her, was just a future receipt. That the affection came with interest. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't throw anything. I just stood, calmly, reached into my back pocket, and pulled out my wallet. I took out a few $100s, everything I had on me, and laid it on the table, next to the envelope. Fine, I said. Let me pay you to disappear from our lives forever. The room went so quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Gordon blinked. His lips parted. Then, for the first time in the decade I'd known him, he cried. Just like that. Not loud. Not messy. Just silent tears sliding down his face as he stared at the cash on the table. Suzanne looked panicked, like she didn't know whether to comfort him or keep defending their position. Felix just stared at his plate. Harper stood too. Her voice was trembling, but steady. You gave up nothing, she said. You lived in comfort. You had choices. And every time I needed love, you gave me conditions instead. I'm done. We left. We didn't take the leftovers. Didn't say goodbye. That was the beginning of a silence that has lasted days now. They've tried to contact us through calls, texts, and a letter that came from a law office but wasn't filed formally. We haven't answered. Harper has barely spoken about it. Not because she's bottling it up, but because I think she's finally processing just how deep the manipulation went. All her life, she thought their love was something she had to earn. That if she just did well enough, pleased them enough, she'd finally get it unconditionally. Now, she knows better. I've been trying to keep the house quiet, calm. Making her coffee in the mornings. Taking Pepper on long walks. Giving her space. I know she's not ready to talk. But when she is, I'll be there. I've started thinking a lot about what family means. What it should mean. And how often we confuse debt with love, obligation with care. Gordon and Susan don't want their money back. Not really. They want control. They want us to stay small, to keep bowing our heads and thanking them for crumbs. But we're done bowing. The days that followed were strange. Not loud, not messy, just strange. Like waking up in a house that looked the same, but somehow felt emptier. Not because something was missing, but because something false had finally been stripped away. Harper moved like a woman trying to remember how to breathe. She worked less, walked more, took the long route to the coffee shop on Haywood just to be alone with her thoughts. At night, she'd lie beside me, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like it owed her answers. I didn't push. I knew this wasn't a wound that needed bandaging. It was an old scar finally opened, and it had to bleed before it could heal. Then the second letter came. Not from Gordon this time, or any lawyer. It was from Suzanne, handwritten in that sharp, slanted cursive that always looked like it belonged on a thank you card from a wealthy aunt you never met. No envelope, just folded neatly and slipped into our mailbox. Harper read it once, then again, then she handed it to me. It was 3 pages long. At first, it sounded like an apology. Suzanne talked about how motherhood was complicated, how choices made in love can be misread as control. She mentioned stress, expectations, the pressure of raising a daughter who didn't quite fit the mold they'd envisioned. It was carefully worded, almost elegant. But then came the last paragraph. She wrote that she hoped we could still find a way to balance the emotional and financial books, that family ties shouldn't be severed over misunderstandings and emotions, and that if we were willing to come to the table, they would be open to negotiation. Negotiation. Like Harper was a lease agreement we were behind on. Harper didn't cry. She didn't shout. She folded the letter again, walked it into the kitchen, and dropped it straight into the trash. That night, we lay in bed, not speaking. She reached over and put her hand on my chest. I think they've always been like this, she said quietly. I just never let myself believe it. I nodded, not sure what to say. I was still turning that word negotiation over in my head like a bad taste. The next morning, I found Felix waiting outside our house. He was leaning against his car, arms crossed, looking out at the street like he'd been there a while. I walked out with Pepper, leash in hand. Mind if we talk? He asked. I nodded and sat down on the porch steps. Felix wasn't like his parents. He was odd, sure, but there was a softness in him. A nervousness that made you think he never quite figured out where he belonged. He started slow. Said he didn't agree with what their parents had done. Said he thought it was a gross commodification of love. He actually used those words. I didn't correct him. But then he said something that stuck with me. They don't know how to love people without owning them, he said. That's all they've ever done. Bought things. Bought people. And when you don't play by their rules, they think they're being betrayed. I looked at him. And what do you think we should do? He sighed. Honestly, burn the bridge. Salt the ground. You've already made the right choice. Then he left. I told Harper about it later. She listened carefully, like she was adding it to some invisible pile of evidence she was still sorting through. The next day, we got another message. This time from a mutual friend of Suzanne's, a woman named Lorraine who Harper had known since childhood, someone who always hovered around the edges of her parents' social circle. She texted Harper a long message filled with concern, passive-aggressive empathy, and that same polished guilt that Suzanne wielded so effectively. I just hope you know how much your parents love you, she wrote. They made sacrifices, dear. They might not be perfect, but they did what they thought was best. Families fight, but they also forgive. Harper didn't respond. She just handed me the phone, and I read the message again and again, trying to figure out what part of it was more manipulative, the guilt or the gaslighting. That night, we sat on the back porch. The air was cool, heavy with spring moisture. Harper pulled a blanket around her shoulders, holding her coffee like it was the only warm thing left in the world. She looked tired. I thought for a long time that if I worked hard enough, they'd be proud of me, she said. I picked the right schools, the right jobs, even married the wrong kind of man just to prove I wasn't trying to impress them. I laughed, but she didn't. That's not what I meant, she said. You're the only right thing I've ever done, Nolan. But I married you knowing they'd hate it. That was part of it. I was angry. I was trying to be my own person, and I thought maybe if I shoved it in their faces, they'd finally see me. But they didn't. They never have. She stared out into the dark yard for a while before she continued. I'm tired of fighting for crumbs. Tired of proving I'm worth something just because they paid for things. I'm not a receipt. I'm not in debt. And I'm done being their investment. I reached over, took her hand. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But it felt like something shifted. The next morning, she blocked her parents' numbers. 2 days later, a delivery truck showed up at our house. A courier brought a large box with Harper's maiden name written on it. No note. No card. Inside, we found old photo albums, childhood art projects, and a folder full of report cards and certificates. A literal box of her history. I think it was supposed to hurt. But all Harper did was pick up a framed photo of her from high school, standing between Gordon and Suzanne at her graduation, all of them smiling like they were cast in a play. She looked at the picture, then set it back in the box. They want me to remember them at their best, she said. But I don't think I ever knew them at all. We pushed the box into the garage and left it there. About a week after the box arrived, the silence stretched long enough that we started to believe it might finally be over. That maybe the point had been made, the message delivered. Maybe they were ashamed, or tired, or just retreating to regroup. Either way, we weren't chasing closure. Harper started to feel lighter. She painted again, not for work, but for herself. She used to paint small, quiet landscapes that looked like places you might have visited in dreams. I noticed one on the kitchen counter one morning, soft, sweeping trees under a gray sky, and a narrow, winding trail leading toward a ridge that disappeared into mist. She never said a word about it, but I didn't have to ask. I knew she was painting the way out. But peace doesn't last long in families like this. It was a Saturday. I was halfway through mowing the backyard, earphones in, the sound of the machine drowning everything out. Harper came out onto the porch barefoot, waving me down. I shut the mower off, pulled the earphones out, and she just handed me her phone. Check your email, she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. I did. It was a forwarded message from Gordon. A long, cold, clinical email with attached PDFs, spreadsheets, scanned receipts, an actual itemized summary labeled support provided to Harper and Nolan. There were totals at the bottom. Numbers broken down into categories: tuition assistance, wedding contributions, family meals, vacations, miscellaneous support. It looked like something an accountant might prepare for a client going through divorce. It didn't even have emotion behind it, just math. There was a single sentence in the body of the email. Please review the enclosed for discussion. We are willing to consider flexible terms if a repayment schedule is preferable. No greeting. No love, Dad. Just that. I handed the phone back. Harper didn't say anything for a long time. She stared past me, into the yard, where Pepper was chewing on a stick like the world hadn't just been turned into a spreadsheet. Then she spoke. I want to send them something, she said. But not what they want. I nodded. Okay. What are you thinking? I don't know yet. But I don't want this to sit. I want to respond. For me, not for them. So that night, she sat at her desk with a yellow legal pad and a glass of wine and started writing. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten, deliberate. It took her 2 hours. She didn't let me read it right away. When she was done, she folded it, put it in an envelope, and slid it into my hand. Mail this for me tomorrow. Don't read it until after. So I did. 2 days later, a storm rolled through Asheville. Thunder, heavy rain, the kind of storm that rattles windows and makes the world feel like it's pressing down on you. Harper made soup. We stayed in. And then the knock came. Not loud, just firm, measured. I opened the door, already knowing. Gordon stood there, alone, drenched. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a sweater, soaked through. His hair clung to his face. I read the letter, he said. I didn't move from the doorway. Then you know where we stand. He looked past me, toward the hallway, like maybe he thought Harper might appear. She meant what she wrote? He asked, voice low. She's never written anything she didn't mean. He swallowed, eyes bloodshot, skin pale. Not angry, just small. Smaller than I'd ever seen him. I didn't come to fight, he said. There were things in that letter I didn't expect. I waited. She said we raised her to think love was something you had to pay for. That even as a child, she felt like she was on trial. That every time we bought her something, she had to earn it twice over. He paused. I didn't know she remembered things like that. I didn't speak. He looked down at the steps. When she was 7, he said suddenly, I remember she broke a glass vase at a dinner party. Suzanne was furious. Made her apologize in front of the guests. Later, I found her in her room, sitting in the dark. She asked if we still loved her. I told her of course. But I also told her she had to be more careful, that we couldn't afford mistakes. I thought I was teaching responsibility. He looked up, but maybe I was teaching her something else. The wind shifted. The rain came in at an angle, misting into the doorway. I didn't invite him in. What do you want from us? I asked. He shook his head. Nothing. Not anymore. I came to say I'm sorry. Not just for the email. For all of it. I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. And Suzanne? He exhaled. She's not there yet. I nodded slowly. Well, that's not our job anymore. He didn't argue, didn't push, just stood there a moment longer, letting the rain fall around him. Then he turned, walked down the steps, and into the storm. I watched until he disappeared. When I went back inside, Harper was standing in the hallway. You heard? I nodded. She stepped forward, arms around my waist, face pressed into my shoulder. I don't want to fix them, she whispered. You don't have to. I just want to stop carrying it. You will. And I think, in that moment, she finally believed it. As my father-in-law cried, the room fell into stunned silence. My wife gently reached for my hand, her grip steady but soft. For once, her parents looked unsure, like they were realizing something they hadn't expected. I didn't ask to be born, my wife said, her voice calm but firm. And I certainly didn't ask you to tally up every act of love like it was a debt. Her mother tried to interject, but my wife raised her hand. No, we're done being manipulated by guilt masked as generosity. If your love for me has always been transactional, then maybe it's time we close the account. I pulled a check from my wallet. I'd already written the amount calculated down to the cent based on everything they demanded. I slid it across the table slowly. Here's your refund. Hope it makes up for the daughter you just lost. But I wasn't angry. I was free. And for once, they were the ones left to sit with the cost of their choices, not us. We walked out together, the door clicking shut behind us. Outside, my wife laughed light, genuine. So what now? I smiled. Now we live. Without them. On our terms. It's been 3 years since that night. I sometimes think about how surreal it was sitting in that living room, being handed a bill for loving someone. A bill dressed up in memories and manipulation. But that moment, that confrontation, became the turning point for both of us. We never heard from her parents again. At first, there were a few text half-hearted attempts to justify their actions, laced with guilt and subtle threats about how ungrateful we were. We didn't respond. Not once. Eventually, the messages stopped. Silence took over. And in that silence, we found peace. In the months that followed, my wife and I went to therapy not because we were broken, but because we wanted to make sure we didn't carry their legacy forward. She confronted the parts of herself that had learned to equate love with approval, and I learned to support her without always trying to fix everything. We grew, not just as individuals, but as partners. Financially, the check I gave them bounced. On purpose. I knew it would. It was a symbolic gesture, a final act of theater for people who valued money more than relationships. They tried to cash it twice. Then I gave up. We never heard another word. We moved cities a year later. Not because we had to, but because we wanted a fresh start. Somewhere they'd never been. A place we could make our own. We bought a small house near the ocean. Nothing fancy. Just enough to wake up to light through the windows and the sound of waves if the wind was right. We filled that house with things that mattered: plants, books, and laughter. Friends who became our chosen family. We started hosting dinners. The kind our parents never would have approved of: potlucks with mismatched plates, loud conversations, spontaneous dancing in the kitchen. No one was keeping receipts. No one was keeping score. One night, about 2 years after the family meeting, we were cleaning up after a party. Music still playing, the smell of garlic and wine lingering in the air. She sat on the floor with her back against the fridge, a wine glass in her hand. I sat across from her, just watching her smile at nothing in particular. I used to think love was something you owed, she said quietly. Like I had to earn it. Be good enough. Make it worth it. But you never made me feel that way. You never owed me anything, I said. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. She laughed, that same quiet, genuine laugh she had the night we walked away. I wish I'd met you first. Before all of that. You met me exactly when you were supposed to, I said. You had to grow out of their shadow to walk into your own light. She nodded, then raised her glass. To never go back. I raised mine too. To build something better. Now, years later, we've done just that. We run a small business together with her idea, of course. A boutique floral studio that focuses on sustainable arrangements. It's not about money. It's about beauty, care, connection. Things her parents never seemed to value. People ask us sometimes about our families. We tell them the truth. Not the ugly details, just the shape of it, that we chose to walk away from something that no longer served us. That we chose each other instead. Some think it's sad. I don't blame them. But what they don't understand is that sometimes, choosing yourself and the people who love you unconditionally is the most powerful form of revenge. Our life now is soft. Safe. Not perfect, but real. And that's more than enough.